Hi, everyone. We'll be getting started in just a few moments. We just want to give everyone a chance to get signed on. Okay, I think we can probably go ahead and get started. So I just want to welcome you all. My name is Nicole Jarvis. I'm Assistant Director of Programs at Cancer and Careers. Thank you all for joining us today. For those of you listening in from your phone, please let us know by sending us an email to cancerandcareers@cew.org. And please include your name and the phone number that you're dialing in from. This way we're able to confirm your attendance and make sure that you're able to receive all of the relevant follow-up information following today's webinar. Sorry, having a little bit of a lag with my screen. So if you are new to Cancer and Careers, we're a national nonprofit, and we are the only program of our kind solely dedicated to empowering and educating people with cancer to thrive in their work environments. Right here, you can see this is a list of all of the free programs and services that we offer. Our comprehensive website, which is available in both English and Spanish and is really at the heart of everything that we do. Here you can find various support services, including our resume review service and access to career coaches. Our educational blog and newsfeed are both rich resources where those who have been diagnosed, their caregivers, employers, and healthcare professionals can really stay current on topics that are related to work and cancer. Our free publication library, which is also available in both English and Spanish, provides tangible, easy to digest information on working and looking for work after a cancer diagnosis. These publications are available in hard copy to be mailed or PDF formats to be downloaded. We also offer numerous events each year, from our hour-long webinars like this one today, to full-day events like our virtual conferences. I'll be back to tell you a little bit more about those at the end of today's presentation and just some upcoming events that we have. Now, for those of you who are seeking continuing education credits, this slide lists all of the organizations who have accredited today's webinar, as well as the required steps for getting a certificate. This information is also available on our website. A link to the evaluation and the post-test will be shared at the conclusion of the webinar. So please do take the time to complete them at that point. If you're unable to complete those today, a follow-up email with the links will be sent tomorrow, Thursday, February 8th by 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Also, for those of you planning to request continuing education, our accrediting bodies require us to share this slide and let you know that there are no conflicts of interest to report. As you might know, Zoom has a lot of great features that you can use to interact with the event with us and with other attendees. So there is the chat and your features panel. You'll see the chat box there. Feel free to use that chat box to communicate with our speaker, CAC staff, and other attendees. But I do just want to note really quickly that the chat box is not private, and it will show your first and last name that you use to log into Zoom. So if that's something that you're concerned about, just be mindful when and if you do decide to engage in the chats. There's also Q&A. So if you have any questions about today's content, please submit them by clicking the Q&A box, which is below. Don't put them in the chat box as we're not looking for the questions there. And we know the importance of privacy, so there is the option to submit your questions anonymously if you would like to. We'll do our best to answer everyone's questions, but please be patient. If we don't get to your question today, please send us an email at cancerandcareers@cew.org. And also we tend to go through a lot of information, so you might find that your question will be answered, which is why we save the questions for the end. Now, thanks in part to support from Genentech and P&G Beauty, Cancer and Careers is proud to offer this 10th year of the Balancing Work and Cancer webinar series, which was created really to provide anyone whose life has been touched by cancer with concise, targeted information about the work-related issues that arise after a diagnosis. Additionally, we'd like to recognize Cancer and Careers year-round sponsors who support all of our core programs and really allow us to continue providing all of our resources and services free of charge. Now, being able to work remotely is no longer an exception to the rule. Many companies have revised their policies over the past few years, enabling employees to work from someplace other than their traditional in-person work sites. This shift has benefited many people, especially those navigating work after a cancer diagnosis who are seeking greater flexibility in their schedules, hoping to eliminate a taxing commute, or really to embrace any of the other advantages working from home may provide. Of course, working remotely may also come with some challenges as well, many of which we'll walk you through today. We'll also discuss some potential solutions for managing them as well. Leading today's webinar is Sissy Silva, Senior Manager of Programs and Spanish Resources here at Cancer and Careers. Following Sissy's presentation, as I mentioned, there will be time for a Q&A, so please feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A box. I'll be monitoring the chat box while Sissy's presenting, but if there are questions that you'd like answered during the Q&A session, please make sure to submit them to the Q&A box. And without further ado, I will hand it over to Sissy.
Thank you, Nicole, and good afternoon, everyone. Before we jump in, here's a little overview of what today's discussion will include. Like Nicole said, we'll have time at the end for further questions, so please feel free to drop them in the Q&A box, and we can discuss anything unanswered during the session. Today, we'll discuss current attitudes towards remote work, the challenges of working a hybrid or remote schedule and strategies for addressing them, strategies for negotiating beginning to or continuing to work from home, and finally, tips for looking for a new remote position. So as we get started, I want to ask, what's the new normal? Given how the last almost now 4 years have played out, it makes sense to ask whether this new remote setup will be considered the new normal. Even prior to the pandemic, remote work was becoming much more acceptable and commonplace over the last decade. And a few notes to make in the realm of how remote work relates to those with cancer. Prior to the pandemic, those with disabilities, which also includes those with a cancer diagnosis, were 20% more likely to work from home than similar workers without a disability. Now, this may be due to informal work agreements and arrangements or formalized plans that were considered reasonable accommodations. Either way, remote work for people with cancer is not a new concept, but it can be really useful. McKinsey conducted a survey of workers after 2 years of the pandemic, and of those surveyed, nearly 60% reported that they worked from home at least 1 day a week. And again, this would include those who work remotely full-time and those who have some sort of hybrid schedule. Finally, there's an indication that flexible work, which again includes remote work and hybrid schedules, has grown almost tenfold in the last 4 years. That's really significant, and again suggests that this is not just a temporary phase. And I just want to do a quick temperature check for those of you on the call today. In just a moment, actually, I just see that the poll has launched. We just want to see how many of you on the call right now are working remotely. And while we get those results in, I would like to share a little bit of background about CAC. We've been fully remote since 2020, and we used to have a physical office, but we are all working from home since then. And I personally love having no commute, but working remotely definitely has its ups and downs. We have to make conscious efforts to make sure that we're communicating effectively and that critical information is shared between everyone. And I see here that a good deal of you actually are currently working remotely, either full-time or part-time. And also a good deal of you are also working in person. Very nice. So now let's get into some of the benefits of remote work. Well, everyone can cite some reasons why working from home may be beneficial or preferable. The benefits to working remotely for those with a cancer diagnosis are plentiful. It can eliminate those long, often pricey commutes. This means that energy that would be normally expelled on getting to and from work can be saved and put towards actually working. You're also able to get hours back of your day, which means getting more sleep, more time to exercise, or more time to make yourself meals instead of just grabbing something fast and easy on the way to work. Time is very valuable, as many of you probably know, and the ability to have more of it can make a huge difference in your day. Now, as we all know, cancer and treatment can severely impact one's immune system. So if you're someone who takes, say, public transportation to work, a remote job can avoid some exposure to germs on your commute. The ability to work from home also means avoiding cold season in the office, where you can't always rely on coworkers to stay home when they're sick or to bring back germs from a sick child at home or someone else that they live with. Being able to isolate in a safe environment can be critical for those with a compromised immune system. A common side effect of treatment is chemo brain, also known as brain fog, and having your own space without many coworkers and not working in a shared open floor plan can mean a greater ability to focus and be productive, as well as having more control over things like interruptions and distractions. Finally, a remote work setup can also mean that there's more flexibility in your schedule to attend things like doctor's appointments and treatment. Many appointments can be attended virtually, which saves a lot of time and energy, but can also be done from the privacy of your home without any concerns that any coworkers or your employer can overhear your conversations. And also, if you need to attend treatment that is hours long, you can also bring your computer and work from the chemo chair if that's something that you're feeling up for. This means not needing to take any time away from work and limited disruptions to your workday and or work week. Now, this may not be for everyone, but it can certainly take some pressure and stress off if you're in active treatment and need to complete a project or meet certain deadlines. Of course, working from home may not be for everyone. Some people enjoy the social aspects of being in an office. Some people may focus better outside of their homes. But the data really shows that the majority of employees would prefer to have the option to work remotely. This is not limited to specific demographics, occupations, or geographies. Given what we saw during the pandemic, where many jobs that had never been remote before turned out to function pretty well in a remote capacity, this opened up the door for future positions being remote. And now from that study that I cited earlier, as of spring 2022, 35% of job holders stated that they either work from home full-time, and 23% saying that they worked from home part-time. Advances in technology and software have enabled so many jobs to function remotely, and thus, if the option is there, people would like to take it. Now, it's no secret that the pandemic has influenced many attitudes about work and what job seekers are currently valuing and or prioritizing. For example, for those who are actively job searching now, many people have stated that the ability to decide where and when they work is a major factor in the types of jobs that they're applying for. The digital nomad lifestyle has become even more popular over the last few years. Flexibility in schedules to care for kids and family members is also being prioritized. And overall, a greater control over one's time and energy is being recognized as a major factor when considering new jobs. So now that we've established that the work landscape has changed over the past decade or so, still not every single industry or organization has been able to transition completely to full-time virtual jobs for its staff, nor do they plan to. As a result, many people who were asked to work from home temporarily have probably been asked to return to the office at least part-time. However, if you feel strongly that you want to continue to work remotely, discuss this with your boss. It's possible that they're willing to make an exception in your case, where you can work from home full-time or part-time or have some sort of hybrid arrangement. There's also another aspect that employees are grappling with, and it's the attitude that the pandemic is over. Of course, there have been many safety improvements, higher rates of vaccination, etc. But for those with a compromised immune system, it can feel like your needs and concerns are not necessarily being considered in some of the decisions that influence this attitude. So with that said, if you're dealing with an employer who feels this way, it's important for you to consider what your safety needs are, what the recommendation of your healthcare providers are, and finally, what types of options or setups would make you feel more comfortable and properly protected. Now that we've discussed the many benefits to working remotely, it's also important to point out some of the specific challenges. First are the physical aspects of a functional workspace can be challenging to get right. Many have reported feeling isolated and lonely working from home all day. Despite so many of us having social interactions online, it can still be hard to get communications right and be able to effectively express ourselves via emails, texts, or even video calls. Setting boundaries in life and work can be difficult in general, but ensuring a balance between your work and personal life can be especially challenging when working from home, where the lines can sometimes feel a little blurred. And finally, when it comes to a cancer diagnosis, there are certain disclosure and privacy considerations that need a little extra attention when working in an online setup. Now, I'll be diving into these aspects over the next few slides, so we're better able to articulate the challenges and identify some solutions that can be used to alleviate or eliminate these obstacles. And with that said, we'll start with the remote work setup. As I mentioned, the actual physical workspace can pose a challenge when starting to work remotely. Space and privacy can be limited, especially if a home office was not something that was considered when choosing your home or apartment, and therefore options to have an actual desk can feel non-existent. Identifying a specific workspace, even if it's not an actual desk, can make all the difference in creating a balance between work and personal time. And that balance is tricky, but having a physical separation can communicate to your brain when it's time to work and when it's not. The way you set up your desk can help you stay focused while you work, which can also be particularly helpful for patients and survivors experiencing some side effects, such as chemo brain. Decluttering your work surface helps minimize distractions, and organizing your files can help you stay on task. For instance, making sure that your mail with your medical and utility bills aren't getting mixed up with your work documents can make all of the difference between making payments on time and getting late charges. Having things like folders, baskets, etc. can also help you have a more organized setup and prevent any potential mishaps with your personal files getting mixed up in work files. Similarly, making sure that supplies and equipment are easily accessible can eliminate any undue exertion if you're experiencing symptoms like fatigue. Also, you want to make sure that your setup isn't merely comfortable for you in that moment, but that it also supports your physical health in the long run. Now, this can be especially important if you don't have a desk and instead are sitting in maybe your bed or your couch with your laptop. And as important as your physical setup are breaks. Breaks are so important to focus. It may seem counterintuitive that taking a break away from work will help with flow, but everyone needs to give their brain a break from time to time. And nowhere is that more true than those who are balancing a cancer diagnosis with work. Getting up to stretch regularly, taking midday walks. These things can be really helpful. Even just getting up and looking out the window for a minute or two to clear your mind can really help with focus and productivity. As mentioned, not everyone is able to have a designated workspace. So how can you figure out a way to make that physical separation? Maybe if you work from your dining room table, make it a point to clear off the table every evening so that you can have that clear separation, and that when you're eating dinner in that space, you're not looking at anything related to work. Comfort is also so important to having an effective and practical workspace. Being comfortable can distract from certain pains, and ask yourself, is working from the couch better for your physical comfort? How does that look for you? For instance, if your joints are very sensitive for treatment, maybe sitting on the couch or working from bed may make your body feel more at ease and increase your ability to focus on work. Now, this conversation on setup wouldn't be complete without mentioning the ADA and how the ADA, or the Americans with Disabilities Act, can come into play when setting up a home office. Perhaps there's specific equipment or software that would make doing your job a lot easier. It's worth exploring if reasonable accommodations are available to you through work before making any purchases on your own dime. There are a number of great resources for learning more about the ADA and reasonable accommodations, such as the Job Accommodation Network, who has templates that you could use to make any formal requests to your employer, as well as ideas for accommodations based on your specific symptoms. Finally, we also have an article on our website that provides an overview of the process and some additional ideas and approaches, which you can see linked on this slide. Now, it might initially seem easy enough to set up a home office, but when thinking about what will be most comfortable day in and day out, it can be helpful to have some guidance. The Rising Workplace is a website and organization focused specifically on providing in-depth information on creating an ergonomically friendly workspace, both in an office and at home. Early on in the pandemic, they released a free 20-minute video, which is linked on this slide, on ergonomics and working from home for guidance on creating a more comfortable workspace by using an ergonomic approach. So I would highly encourage you to check that out. And we also have a blog post discussing tips for working remotely, which is also linked on this slide. Now, shifting the conversation a bit, for many, workplace interactions account for a majority of weekday socialization. Many people live alone, and not having that friendly small talk or conversations in the break room can mean a lot less socializing throughout the days, which can certainly lead to feelings of loneliness and isolation. Luckily, there are some ways to combat these feelings. Having regular check-ins with coworkers is a great way to stay on top of both your workload and responsibilities, but also serves as a way to sustain friendly relationships with coworkers as well. Of course, this really depends on your workplace culture and relationships, but if it's appropriate, maybe schedule in 5 to 10 minutes at the beginning of meetings for people to socialize and catch up, to make people feel more connected and add a little more of a casual feel to interactions with coworkers, which can ultimately mean more meaningful connections. Virtual events are also great team building opportunities. They may look and feel a little different from the ones in person, but they are just as important. From virtual pizza parties or coffees to online group games, the possibilities are endless. And just like check-ins, a virtual team building activity can help bring coworkers together and remind everyone that they're part of a larger team and each of you play a specific part. Of course, a lot of people have been zoomed out, especially after the pandemic, from all the socializing that we did during that time. So it's important to be mindful of what exactly people want to do. Maybe take a poll or a survey of what people are specifically interested in, which can make these events more successful, enjoyable, and most importantly, attended. Now, as I mentioned earlier, working from home can also make it difficult to separate work and personal life. So making sure that life still exists outside of work is extremely important. Engaging in activities outside of work can help add more of that human interaction that working remotely lacks. Signing up for things like exercise classes, new craft hobbies, meeting a friend for a walk after work, joining a book club. All these small actions can lead to feeling more social and engaged. Maybe set time aside for yourself, especially that has nothing to do with any type of responsibility. Take yourself out to lunch, meditate, listen to a podcast. Pretty much anything that allows you to give yourself that small break and do something that you enjoy. Self-care can go a long way in terms of keeping a clear and happy mind and increase your quality of life. And just a quick shout out, we have a recording of our webinar on self-care featuring oncology social worker Wade Iwata up on our website. So I would encourage you to check that out. And we also have recordings on our next topic. Some aspects of communication when working remotely can be even more challenging than if you were in the same location as your supervisor or your team. Awkward silences, unsteady Wi-Fi connections, and the lack of social cues that occur naturally in person can lead to things like misunderstandings, talking over one another, and overall ineffective communication. Without the ability to have natural interactions with your employer in an office setting, communications need to be a little more intentional when working remotely. As mentioned before, in terms of the benefits of socialization and staying connected on a personal level, regularly scheduling check-ins are also very important to stay on task and ensure that everyone's expectations are being met and that there are no gaps in understanding of how things are going. Having standing meetings with your supervisor can also be useful for exploring what's working well and where improvements need to be made so that there's no misunderstandings, no resentment brewing, and everyone feels good about the current setup. We also have to keep in mind that there can also be differences in the standards of communication between an in-person workplace and an all virtual workplace that might require some extra effort, new skills, and some getting used to. There can be challenges that present themselves when you may be working remotely while everyone else is in the physical office. So allowing a little bit of room and time to get it right can be a good idea. Having open and honest communications can also mean that there's no misunderstandings of what the expectations are. And this can mean having a more formalized plan for setting up hours, for setting hours and schedules, and making sure that everyone is on the same page of how to update your team and supervisor on the status of a project. And of course, having a copy of your employee handbook on hand can provide valuable information quickly. So if there's a formal policy around remote work to refer back to, it can help you be more confident, you understand what is expected of you as a remote worker. But if there's no handbook or set policy on remote work, maybe have a conversation with your employer to make sure that there's a mutual understanding of what should and should not be done. Finally, as I said earlier, if working remotely is a reasonable accommodation for you and your coworkers are currently in the office working in person, make sure that you figure out what the best way for you to stay in the loop on is. Since you may not be part of certain conversations that happen organically when people are in a shared space, such as running into each other in the hall or at the water cooler, or popping into a conference room for a quick unscheduled discussion. Again, having these regular formal meetings can be a great way to make sure that you don't miss out on any of these important information that happens during these informal conversations in the office. And just as important as communicating effectively is the ability to set boundaries. I think everyone can agree that boundaries are an important aspect of every single aspect of life, and work is no different. Making sure to draw clear lines at work can not only help you to become more productive and in control, but can also empower you and make you feel more confident personally and as a professional. Now, the graphic on this slide illustrates the cycle that many can get caught up in if they do not set and stick with boundaries. By setting reasonable parameters ahead of time regarding expectations for workload or hours worked each day and so on, you can avoid unrealistic expectations and prevent people from taking advantage of you, while also making sure that you're prioritizing yourself and your health. If the idea of identifying and articulating specific boundaries in the context of your job feels uncomfortable for you, know that you are not alone. This can be especially true for those of us and those of you who identify as people pleasers and who have trouble saying no. But recognizing areas where you need to establish what your specific limits are is really important to help ensure that you won't end up burning out. For some people, these are going to be time related, such as adhering to a previously set schedule or saying no to an extra project that you currently don't have the bandwidth for. Or they can be related to your comfort, such as the ability to keep your camera off on a day where you're feeling a little more low energy, or maybe taking more breaks throughout the day. All are extremely important for maintaining control over your work-life balance. The specific challenges faced may vary between different people who are working from home. For some people, one of the challenges of working remotely is that they end up putting a lot more hours than they would if they were on site. Sometimes people who don't have to commute wind up sitting down at their desk a little earlier or working a little later than they would if they had to leave the office to maybe catch a train or beat traffic, for example. Also, because there's often no real physical separation between home and work, the official end of the day can also become a little fuzzier. The key to setting effective boundaries in the workplace is crafting language that feels natural and communicates that no message in a way that is still professional and team-oriented. Now, on the slide, you'll see a few specific professional no's that can be really useful when thinking about this. You can use this same language exactly as is written if it works for your specific circumstance, or it can be adopted to sound more like you and whatever your situation is. And if you're working from home with maybe roommates or family in the same space as you, it's important to communicate with them clearly what your needs are. That could mean giving them a heads up when you're about to join a meeting where you need focus and quiet, or setting up systems with your kids so that they know when it's okay to interrupt and when it's not. If you find that there are too many audio or visual distractions, you might want to consider using something like noise canceling headphones, or maybe a room divider if that's possible. If you're able to create a work area that suits your needs perfectly, it's still important to leave it occasionally. So physically removing yourself from the space in which you work, both during and at the end of your workday, is also very critical. If you're able to take a break, whether that means meditating, stretching, flipping through a magazine, or taking a brief walk, be sure to do it somewhere else. Immersing yourself in a different physical location is as important as giving your brain a rest. And both are key to maintaining psychological well-being on the job and in life. Now, while you may no longer work in an office full of people every day, you still want to be mindful of your choices regarding disclosure and privacy. Be careful not to develop a false sense of security just because you're working in a more personal, private space, because in some ways, you may need to be even more hyper aware when working from home. For example, if you work from home and have video meetings, your coworkers, clients, and whomever you're meeting with will be able to view your personal space. So make sure that there's nothing visible in the background that you're not comfortable with sharing. Or you can choose things or features like virtual backgrounds or blurred backgrounds that you can, for example, that you can see me using today. Also, if you're sharing your screen during meetings, be aware of any desktop files, pop-up notifications, etc., that may be visible while you're sharing your screen. So it can be a good idea to pause those before you start that share screen feature. If you check your personal email or log into any personal accounts on a work device, we also recommend that you sign out at the end of each day and set up some sort of two-factor authentication so that you can make sure that you know whenever anyone tries to sign into it. It's also important to remember that every organization handles cybersecurity differently, and tracking employees and the way that they track employees' activities can also be different. And even if you think that you have a good idea of what your company culture is, you may not know the full extent of what your organization's oversight is. On the extreme end of the spectrum, some companies use programs that record every single activity that happens on the computer that they gave you. These include or can include keystrokes, taking screenshots of your computer desktop, or accessing your camera or microphone. And while a company's reasons for using these programs may be to specifically track productivity in a well-intentioned way, they could still expose information that you'd rather be kept private. It's also very easy for your company's network administrator to monitor your internet activity. So even if you're browsing the web in incognito mode or using privacy mode, The setting makes it so that your web browser doesn't track your data, but it doesn't affect what your employer is able to do. So again, just think twice before Googling things like your diagnosis, treatment, side effects, or doctors on your company computer, if those are things that you would rather keep private. Many companies also use a chat application such as Slack, Microsoft Teams, Google Hangouts, etc. And it's key to know that just because your employer can own some of these programs or have subscriptions to it, that there are ways that there's always a chance that your private messages, that they have access to your private messages. And there's always a chance that even your private messages to a coworker you trust could be reviewed by a supervisor or HR. And so we recommend that same guidance mentioned in screen sharing to apply here. A coworker whom you trust and have discussed your diagnosis with could just as easily accidentally leave their chat window open while sharing a screen during a meeting. Also, keep in mind that if your company shares its primary login for the video conferencing platform, such as Zoom, remember to switch to your personal account before having any private telehealth appointments. And even then, make sure that the program is not set to auto-record. As with many disclosure decisions, the point of all of this that I mentioned is to think ahead and make informed choices so nothing gets accidentally shared. And again, we're not trying to make you feel paranoid, but we do want to arm you with relevant information so that you can consider all angles when thinking about disclosure considerations. Now, if your workplace has returned to be in person, but you still want to work remotely, how would you approach this conversation with your employer? In the early days of the pandemic, traditionally in-person roles were switched to being remote, and many found this to be a positive change. However, it's important to understand that just because there were benefits to working remotely for both the employee and employer, continuing to work from home is not necessarily a given. Being aware of existing policies at work can be really helpful when you make your ask. If a remote work policy is mentioned in your employee handbook, first you should understand the parameters of that policy and how they can be applied to your specific circumstance. If remote work was always viewed in a negative light, perhaps coming to a compromise on, say, a hybrid schedule would be more realistic. Overall, you just want to present a proposal that considers the needs of all of those involved. So this means thinking through how you would ensure that the needs of the company are continued to be met. This may mean being on a call at different hours than normal to meet the needs and responsibilities of the role. Also consider if and how your remote role may affect coworkers that may be in the office. And since you are making a formal request, you want to approach it in the most professional way possible. This means bringing a realistic plan to the table that can address any concerns your employer may have regarding to working remotely. Concerns that may include, how can you be contacted? How will you continue supervising anyone who reports to you? How will you participate in team meetings and projects? Well, what will your working hours be? And what, if any, days and times will you be on site? As we discussed earlier, open communication is important. So noting your intention of regular check-ins with your supervisor can serve as an effective way to stay accountable and make sure that your employer is comfortable with the idea. Be organized around your ask. Create a plan conducive with your employer's needs, and recognize any challenges that may exist while proactively making suggested solutions. Though some employers may not view remote work as ideal, it doesn't mean that their minds can't be changed when they're presented with a solid and practical proposal. Finally, it can also be worth looking into whether the ADA or any state or local fair employment laws may provide assistance and potential for working remotely. Citing these can also be really helpful when making your request. Now, for those who are currently looking for work and are focused specifically on remote roles, there are ways to make that a priority in your search. Before really applying, try to consider what your ideal work setup would be, what arrangements you would be okay with, and how important a position being remote is to taking the job. What may be concerns about working remotely? Are they distractions, feelings of isolation, maybe staying productive? Once you've asked yourself these questions, then consider positions that may be less of a concern. Maybe researching versus copywriting, more time spent on the phone versus the computer, a culture of constant communication versus little interactions with coworkers, etc. These are all things to think about when you're starting your remote work search. Now, having remote work experience under your belt can also be a very valuable asset when looking for these types of positions. Some recommendations include, state it clearly. In the experience section of your resume, maybe mention things like remote work next to your top job title or location. For example, director of marketing, and then in parentheses, 100% remote. Or high school biology teacher, partially remote work, Anaheim, California. Include your experience or skills in the descriptions of your past jobs. For example, led a team of 5 customer service reps in a completely remote work environment and successfully earned an average team satisfaction rate of 94%. Build it into your skills section. For example, make sure you list the types of skills it takes to be a successful remote worker. Things like time and task management, communication, self-management, the ability to work independently, and comfort with technology are some of the top skills that employers like to see when hiring for remote jobs. Now, it's important to also stay safe and avoid work from home scans by looking for work on trusted job boards and specialized remote work sites. More and more companies are using or considering hybrid work from home models. Remote work, whether that's full-time or part-time, may be something that your employer would be open to, or that could possibly be a reasonable accommodation for you. Making sure your search settings are set to remote work can also help highlight companies that have a heavy work from home staff. This can often mean a more structured setup, more defined expectations, more organization, and a lot less guesswork. While many jobs are being promoted and advertised as remote, it's still possible to request a work from home setup, even if the position isn't originally designed to be that way. If you are exploring a position that is not necessarily remote, make sure to not dive into that question right away, but rather give the interviewer a chance to get to know you and why you would excel in that role, and then broach the topic of remote work to gauge if that's a possibility or not for that position. And as we've discussed throughout, there are certainly some nuances to communicating virtually compared to what we need to be mindful when we're in person. While similar rules apply when interviewing virtually versus in person, there are a few additional considerations to make when interviewing virtually. Typically, part of an interview preparation will include timing your travel time to your interview to make sure that you're there on time. But in this instance, you'll want to make sure that you are completely ready with all of your technology so that there are no issues with starting on time and connecting successfully. Also, dressing appropriately continues to be expected in every single interview, despite the fact that most likely only your upper body will be on camera. It's still a good idea to be dressed head to toe as if you were in an in-person interview. You never know what could happen, or for some reason, maybe you'll want to stand up during the call. It can be very helpful to be dressed for the occasion. So, and it can also be helpful to do so to put yourself in the right mindset. And finally, remember that this is about presenting a fully professional picture. It can be a good idea to use a virtual background, like I mentioned before, or positioning yourself in front of a blank wall. This way that your interviewer can be fully focused on you, the candidate, instead of potentially inferring or assuming things about you based on your home decor. Now, as we wrap up, I want to leave you with some top takeaways. The pandemic showed us that many roles that were previously required to be done from a physical office can be just as productive as a remote position. Organization, communication, and setting boundaries are even more important in a remote role. And finally, it's important to have a work plan clearly laid out between you and your supervisor so that you both know what's expected of you, as well as creating accountability and clear deadlines and a communication system that they know what you've accomplished and what still needs to be done. And before we get to the Q&A, here are some additional resources that might be helpful for you. You should have received this deck in an email so that you can click through all of these and also the resources I mentioned throughout today's session. And if you did not receive this email, just please let us know by emailing us at cancerandcareers@cew.org so that we can send you a PDF copy.
Thanks so much, Sissy. I know even having worked remotely for a number of years now, I always learn a little bit more about what I should be doing from this content. So thank you. So before we move on to the Q&A portion, I do just want to point out that we also have a number of free events still coming up this year. The next 3 months, we have a series of webinars on the job search process starting on March 6th with career shifting. So tips, tools, and techniques for changing your career. We also have First Impressions, which is resume and LinkedIn, on April 3rd, and wrapping up on May 1st with networking, unlocking new opportunities. So all 3 of these sessions will be led by longtime CAC collaborator and career coach, Julie Jansen. You can find the full 2024 webinar lineup on our website. And finally, we hope that you will join us for our 3-day-long conference, 3-day-long conferences in 2024, not 3-day-long. That would be way too long.
That would be intense.
Registration is now open for our Midwest conference, which will be on Friday, March 22nd. And we also have the date for our national conference on Friday, June 21st. And that will be, registration is now open for that. And then, of course, keep an eye open later in the year for our West Coast conference, which will be held sometime in October. We'll post that to our website. Now, if you have any follow-up questions, Sissy's email is on this slide, or you can email cancerandcareers@cew.org. We hope to connect with you on social media as well. So all of our handles are listed here, as well as our bi-monthly newsletter and website. And finally, just want to put the CE requirements here again. I'll leave this open as we move into the Q&A. I do see that we have a couple of questions in the Q&A box. Are you ready to take it away, Sissy?
Sure.
All right. This first question comes from Michael. Are there recommendations on asking employers for home office equipment? So for instance, a file cabinet, bookshelf, computer, hardware, extended desk, etc.
I mean, first of all, it doesn't hurt to ask, and some of these things can be considered reasonable accommodations if you are eligible through the ADA. And this is something that you can work with your employer with. Maybe there are policies around this for companies that have work from home policies in your employee handbook. So I would also recommend taking a look at that and just starting the conversation and seeing if that's a possibility for you. Again, it doesn't hurt to ask, especially if these things are going to help you do your job successfully.
Absolutely. In the long run, them buying you a more comfortable chair so that you can be more productive is not going to be a huge cost loss for them. So definitely worth asking. And the website that Sissy mentioned earlier, Job Accommodation Network,
Yes.
can also come up with some, can provide you with some templates for how to ask for these things so that you're as effective as possible.
Right.
Okay, another question. Do you recommend applying for remote work outside of your own time zone, and how difficult is it to work in another time zone? I can take this one if you'd
Yes,
like.
I was about to say, Nicole
Um,
Jarvis has worked for a while from a different time zone. You would be best for that answer.
Yeah, absolutely. So I work in Denver, but I do work New York hours because that's where the majority of the Cancer and Careers team is located. There are pros and cons, of course, if you're not an early morning person, which I didn't used to be. It can be a little bit of a challenge to get used to. But I also end work earlier, and so I have more time in my day for other things. So it really just depends on what your strengths are. Obviously, if you're talking about a time zone in Europe and you're on the West Coast, that might be very challenging. But you can also explore whether or not they'd be open to having you work whatever hours work well for you, as long as you're getting your deadlines met and there is some sort of overlap with colleagues elsewhere. But at this point, I think a lot of people are working less traditional schedules because of living all over the country. So I think it's definitely worth exploring, and it's part of what you can ask during your interview process as well, if they're open to certain flexibilities around that.
Exactly. And yeah, you can also, like you mentioned, work maybe a different schedule, still having some overlap with colleagues so that meetings are possible. But also working a different schedule than normal work hours can be beneficial to the company so that they have coverage throughout the day. So it really just depends on what works for both you and your employer.
All right, we have about 2 minutes left, so just a little bit more time. My company adopted a flexible work remote policy, and some people are back in the office, but I have stayed remote full time. During calls, I feel like I'm missing out on some of their jokes or relationships. Is there anything you can suggest that I can do to be more connected without risking my immunocompromised health in the office?
Yeah, as I mentioned during the session, you can set up one-on-ones with coworkers. These can be to not only catch up on work, but also catch up personally so that you're able to make those connections even while working remotely. You can also make suggestions that the first 5 to 10 minutes of a meeting are set for catching up with your coworkers before you start diving into the meat and potatoes of whatever that meeting is. Sometimes HR is willing to, especially if they have this type of like mixed employee group where some people are working remotely and some people are in the office, they can set up team building exercises, or maybe that's something that you can suggest to your manager to help make those build some of those connections, and also making those formal setting up formal meetings to make sure that you're up to date on everything that is going on can be also helpful. It doesn't necessarily have to be social, but still making sure that you're in the loop on everything that's going on at work. Nicole, I feel like if you have anything to add, because so before CAC was working fully remotely, Nicole Jarvis was working remotely from
Yes,
Colorado.
I was the pioneer prior
Yes.
to everyone in the world working remotely. Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's going to be a different level of interaction, but like Sissy said, just saving a little time for some informal discussions with people, catching up, staying, in touch via Slack or what have you. If you are able and comfortable to go to any sort of in-person gathering, maybe not at the office, but maybe outside, some sort of team bonding activities, things like that, that can always be helpful also. There's one more question and I think we'll wrap it up. But I just wanted to make sure that we touched on this one. They said there are a lot of websites for project-based work or freelancing, and many require uploading personal information or a profile that is exposed internationally. Are they safe?
Oh, this really depends on the website. I would first do a little research and check out any reviews that are not on the website itself, but on an external, from an external trusted source. And then I would have to check in with you have to check in with yourself to see what your specific limitations are, what your boundaries are, what you're willing to share and what you're not willing to share. And then also be conscientious of like how what you share, like what impacts what you share will have on future disclosure decisions.
Mhm.
And then take it from there. You can also, you don't have to necessarily disclose every little thing about yourself. So it really depends on one, making sure that the website is reputable. And then two, what your comfort level is with your disclosure decisions.
Absolutely. And also, I just want to add in that, typically when things look too good to be true, they're probably too good to be true.
Yes.
So if you're seeing a project-based work or freelance job that's paying way different than some of the other ones that you've been seeing, I would say, be cautious. On the deck that you guys will all have access to, we did have one slide that highlights three trusted job boards. So that's Flex Jobs, LinkedIn, and Remote OK. And so those might be some good ones to start with because we know that they are safer and more secure. Okay, I want to let you guys all go. Thank you so much, Sissy, for your insight and sharing all this information with everyone. I know just from the chats that people have really enjoyed it. And thank you all for joining us and taking this time out of your day to hear us out. We hope that you will join us for future webinars and hopefully for our Midwest conference next month. And we hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Nicole.